There is a peculiar tragedy that plays out quietly inside many relationships, one that rarely explodes but rather erodes. It is the slow ache of emotional distance, a pattern repeated not out of malice but fear. The avoidant partner is not cruel, not indifferent, but scared. Scared of what closeness might awaken inside them, scared of what might be taken from them if they dare to lean in too far. For the avoidant, love feels like both salvation and threat. They long for it as everyone does, to be seen, to be understood, to rest in the warmth of another's affection. And yet at the same time, something deep within whispers, careful. Love costs. So they protect themselves. They do not shout or demand. They withdraw, rationalize, disappear into work, hobbies, or silence. What they call independence is too often a defense. What they describe as peace is sometimes avoidance in disguise. And in that dance, one partner reaching out, the other gently pulling away, love begins to fracture. But what makes this pattern truly tragic is not that avoidants don't care. It's that they do care deeply. They simply don't know how to stay close without losing themselves. Their mistakes are rarely deliberate. Their survival mechanisms turned maladaptive. In this essay, we'll explore 7 of those mistakes. The subtle but devastating ways avoidant individuals unintentionally sabotage the very connection they crave. We'll look not to blame, but to understand, because understanding is the first act of compassion. Avoidants often mistake independence for emotional health. They've been taught, through experience, not lectures, that depending on others invites disappointment. Somewhere along the line, they learned that needing someone makes you weak, and that self-sufficiency equals safety. So they build their world accordingly. They handle everything on their own, refuse help, and interpret intimacy as intrusion. At first, this feels admirable, like strong, composed, even enviable. But slowly, imperceptibly, independence hardens into isolation. The avoidant becomes a person surrounded by people yet profoundly alone. They pride themselves on not needing anyone, yet quietly ache when no one notices their absence. It is a silent suffering, masked by competence. Real independence, the kind that nourishes, isn't about avoiding reliance. It's about choosing connection without fear of losing autonomy. But for the avoidant, that distinction feels impossible. They pull away to preserve themselves, not realizing they're also starving the relationship of oxygen. If only they could see that the courage to lean on someone is not weakness. It is the deepest form of strength. The willingness to trust that love will not devour but sustain. Avoidants often treat emotions, both theirs and others, as something volatile like fire, useful from afar, destructive up close. Growing up, they may have seen feelings lead to chaos, anger exploding, affection withdrawn, love turning conditional. So they learn to shut down what they could not control. In adulthood, that survival skill becomes emotional illiteracy. When their partner cries, they feel overwhelmed. When conflict arises, they default to silence. When joy enters, they stand at the edge, unsure how to fully participate. To them, emotions are landmines. Unpredictable, unsafe, too loud. But what they fail to realize is that emotions are not the enemy of love. They are its language. Avoidants often miss that expressing vulnerability doesn't destroy relationships, it deepens them. Imagine trying to share a meal where one person refuses to eat. That's what emotional avoidance feels like to the other partner. Offering connection to someone who insists they're fine, who says it's nothing, when it is clearly something. Avoidants don't need to drown in emotion. They just need to learn to stand in it. Long enough to show their partner that they are present, not perfect, not composed, but there. Avoidants value peace. They like things steady, predictable, quiet. But sometimes in their quest to avoid emotional storms, they forget that love isn't meant to be entirely calm. It's meant to be alive. They think that as long as there's no fighting, no chaos, everything is fine. But what they call peace can often feel like distance to their partner, a silence heavy with what's unsaid. A relationship without conflict is not necessarily healthy. It's often just unspoken tension wearing a polite mask. True connection involves friction, the gentle rubbing of differences that makes two people real to each other. When avoidants suppress all discomfort, they also suppress growth. They end up with relationships that are safe but sterile. And yet, this mistake comes from a noble instinct: to protect love from pain. What they haven't learned is that love doesn't need to be protected from conflict. It needs to be protected from avoidance, because silence doesn't preserve connection. It only delays its collapse. One of the deepest illusions an avoidant carries is the belief that control equals safety. They think, if I can manage my emotions, manage my space, manage what others expect of me, I won't get hurt again. It sounds reasonable. After all, control does offer a kind of protection, like locking the doors before bed. But emotional control, when used excessively, becomes its own kind of prison. Avoidants don't always realize that what they call control is often fear in disguise. Fear of rejection, fear of dependency, fear of losing their sense of self. They set invisible rules around love. Don't get too close. Don't share too much. Don't rely too heavily. And these rules feel comforting at first, like boundaries that keep the world predictable. But over time, they begin to cost something precious: intimacy. The truth is, love can't be managed like a schedule. It doesn't thrive under supervision. It's messy, unpredictable, sometimes inconvenient. And yet, it's in that mess that connection breathes. Avoidants mistake safety for the absence of vulnerability. But real safety is the presence of trust. The quiet confidence that even if you show your flaws, the other person won't run. Control may keep them unhurt, but it also keeps them unseen. And being unseen is, ironically, the very wound they've been running from since childhood. When they try to control love, they only end up controlling themselves out of it. Avoidants often live in their minds, analyzing, planning, rationalizing. They believe problems can be solved if only everyone were logical enough. Feelings, in their view, are distractions, noise, or irrational data that clouds judgment. But relationships are not data, they are living organisms. You can't spreadsheet your way into connection. When an avoidant dismisses their partner's feelings as overreacting, what they're really saying is, I don't know how to meet you there. It's not arrogance, it's unfamiliarity. They've spent years building a fortress of reason to stay safe from emotional chaos. And yet, emotion is not chaos, it's communication. When your partner says, I feel hurt, that's not a problem to fix, it's an invitation to listen. Avoidants often miss that love isn't about always making sense. It's about making meaning. It's about sitting with discomfort long enough to say, I don't fully understand you, but I'm willing to stay until I do. Logic builds walls. Empathy builds bridges. The avoidance tragedy is that they build magnificent walls out of good intentions, stability, order, independence, and then wonder why no one can reach them. The most profound shift an avoidant can make isn't to think less, but to feel more. Avoidants tend to love retrospectively. They realize the value of connection only after it's gone. When their partner finally gives up, when the calls stop, the messages fade, the warmth turns to silence. Something inside them stirs. It's not indifference that kept them distant before, it's delayed awareness. They process emotions slowly. They intellectualize feelings until the person they love has already packed up and left. And then, when they finally feel the loss, it's too late. They scroll through old messages, remember the softness of shared mornings, and whisper to themselves, I didn't know it mattered this much. Avoidants often underestimate the emotional clock of relationships. They assume there will always be time. Time to figure things out, time to fix, time to reach back when they're ready. But love, like any living thing, requires consistent presence. It doesn't survive on delayed affection. By the time avoidants realize they care, the relationship's oxygen has already run out. The tragedy isn't that they didn't love, it's that they loved in hindsight. The lesson here is simple, though not easy. Say it before it's too late. Send the message now. Apologize now. Reach out while there's still a pulse, because love, unattended, quietly dies of neglect. Perhaps the most common and most costly mistake avoidants make is believing that love will fix them, that the right person will somehow be patient enough, strong enough, loving enough to soften their walls. It's an understandable fantasy. After all, so much of their distance began as a defense against pain. But no partner, no matter how compassionate, can rewrite the story the avoidant refuses to face. Healing doesn't happen when someone else finally loves them correctly. It begins when they decide to stop running from themselves. Avoidants must learn that love is not meant to carry their avoidance. It's meant to reveal it. Each time they pull away, it's not a test of their partner's devotion, but a mirror of their own fear. Each moment they shut down emotionally is an opportunity, not for guilt, but for awareness. Avoidants often crave relationships without realizing that what they truly crave is safety. The safety to be fully human. But safety cannot come from control, distance, or logic. It must come from self-compassion, from learning that their past wounds don't have to dictate their present love. Healing for an avoidant begins the moment they understand this simple truth. You don't have to be unfeeling to be free. You can stay, you can feel, and you can still be safe. When they finally learn that lesson, when they stop defending and start allowing, something remarkable happens. The relationship that once felt suffocating now feels spacious. Intimacy stops being a trap and becomes a home. And that is the quiet redemption of the avoidant heart. To realize that what they feared all along was not love itself, but their own capacity to be loved. In the end, the avoidant story is not one of coldness, but of fear. Not of indifference, but of misunderstanding. They wanted love without the risk of loss, closeness without the ache of vulnerability. But love doesn't negotiate with fear. It asks for everything: your presence, your uncertainty, your trembling honesty. The avoidance journey is a return not to someone else, but to themselves. To that child who learned that love disappears, who built walls to survive, and who must now learn, slowly, painfully, to open those walls again. The 7 mistakes avoidants make in relationships are not fatal flaws. They are unhealed lessons. Lessons that, when faced, can transform distance into connection, isolation into intimacy, fear into quiet trust. Because in the end, what every avoidant must discover is not how to love differently, but how to love bravely.